Yo, what up guys? In this video we're going to talk about my milling process, how I get from the rough lumber that I purchase to milled up nice and square and flat and all that to be used for doors, face frames, or anything else that I need it for. So here we go. All right, so let me just say first, this is not a machine safety video. Use your machines at your own risk, right? I see a lot of people on social media and even in other YouTube videos using big long push sticks and all kinds of stuff with gloves on and pushing down, and I don't do that. I use my hands at the joiner, that's it. I'm not using any push sticks or nothing like that. But you do what you're comfortable with. All right, that's behind us. So I purchase all the lumber that I use rough. So that means when they cut down a tree and they saw it, and then it goes in the kiln, and then it goes to the lumber yard. So I buy it in that state. So it is literally rough, and I need to get it flat and square and down to my thickness and width and all that I need for whatever it is I'm making. So the joiner, for those of you who maybe don't know, the jointer has a cutter head in here. This is a 12-inch spiral cutter head machine, and the infeed table is a little bit lower than the cutter, and it's adjustable so you can take off more or less. And then the outfeed table is perfectly flush with the top of the cutters. When you push your piece through, it registers, it makes your cut, and then it's flat and nice there, and then you won't get any snipe. So snipe is basically if your outfeed table is not level or not flush with your knives, you would see that in your cut. You'd feel a little bump there. It's called snipe. And so after we take it through the jointer, then we go to the planer, and it references off my flat side and makes it perfectly parallel with the bottom edge, and we mill it to whatever thickness we need. So this step is obviously very important in making sure your pieces are square and flat and all that. So there's a lot to take into consideration when you're choosing a board for whatever it is you're making, how you run it through, and all that. So I typically pick up lumber in packs of at least 100 board feet. And if I'm doing like a specific stain grade job and I don't need a ton, I usually like to go to the lumberyard and pick it out myself, pick out each piece, because I'm really looking for flat, straight stuff, and obviously the grain, color, and all that is important. I don't want to be buying boards that are already warped and twisted and all that. The joiner can take that stuff out of them, but if the boards are already twisted, they weren't twisted when they were milled, they were twisted when they dried. So there's probably a lot of tension in there. Even if you mill it flat, there's a good chance it could twist again down the road. And also, wood is unpredictable, right? We never know what it's really gonna do. So when I'm milling a board, so I've got a wide piece like this, and I need a couple 1.5 inch rips out of it. I'm gonna joint the edge and then take this to the table saw, and I'll probably rip like 1 7/8 inches or something, because when there's always usually going to be some tension in the wood, and after you rip it, it's going to have a little bow to it, and then I give myself enough, usually 1/4 to 3/8, depending on how long the piece is, so I can straighten it back out at the joiner. Another thing to think about, especially if I look down my piece, like this piece is pretty nice and straight, but if I've got a big bow to it like this, when I run this through, I want to make sure I'm not pushing down on it, because if I'm pushing down and flattening it out and running it through, when I let my hands go, it's going to go boom, it's going to go right back. So we want to very lightly slide this through, not putting any pressure down, because we want to take that bow out of the board. So I will very lightly run it through, not pushing down, and just kind of get this thing flat. We're trying to get it flat. We're not trying to push down, run this thing through, and then it's going to still have that bow in it. All right, so this piece here, you can see when I put it on the joiner bed, the gap in the middle here. So this piece is kind of like this. So I'll show you how I run it through. and then we'll put it back here and you can see how I get it nice and flat. All right, so now you can see that piece is nice and flat. We've got no gap over there. There was like a 16th plus gap there. So if you heard when I was running it over, it was touching in the front on the first pass. It didn't hit in the middle at all. And then we hit back here at the end. And then the second pass, it got the whole thing. I'm also taking very light passes on this because I don't want to take a huge 1/8 inch cut, which I could on something narrow like this. I could take a big cut on this joiner, but I don't want to do that because the more I take off one side, the more it's going to want to bow. So I'll show you, even when after we flatten it and then we go to the planer, we want to take an even amount off each side. If I just take, you know, say I end up taking off a 16th here on this side, and then I go to the planer and just keep running it through the same way and take a 1/4 inch off the top, this thing's going to start doing this. And I'll show you with this piece, which is nice and straight right now. All right, let's check this out. So I milled it down and you can see, so this was the edge I jointed right there, which was nice and flat, and you can see it's rocking now. And then when I put it through the planer, I only took off the top. So I took off, I don't know, I probably took off 3/8. And you can see, because I took all that material off the top, it's doing this now. So just something to keep in mind. Take off an even amount on each side. What I would do if I was milling material for doors, which I kind of went over this in my doors video, but I break all my parts down into manageable pieces. Obviously, I make them a little oversized for milling, but you don't want to be, I'm never taking full 10-foot boards that are 10 inches wide and flattening them on here, unless for some reason I needed to do that. But for the most part, everything is broken down into smaller pieces. So typically what I'll do when I have a pile of rough lumber is, if it's not already straight lined on one edge, sometimes I get stuff straight lined already, then I can take it right to the table saw. But if not, I'll just joint the edge on my piece of lumber and then I'll rip it down to manageable size width, and then I'll break everything down at the chop saw, and then I bring it here to do the final milling. So I will flatten first. I do a light pass and get this side flat, and then I turn my piece like this up against my fence. I run the edge, and my fence needs to be square with the table, so then I have a perfect 90-degree angle here, and then I can reference off that edge and this edge to do my final rip, or run it through the planer on edge like that to get my width, and I plane it down to whatever thickness I need. And I do have the drum sander as well, so say I'm making face frame parts, I'll mill my material down, usually leave it like a 30-second or so thicker, so that I can put my face frames together if they're small enough to fit through my drum sander, and I'll put the whole face frame through, or I'll sand my parts through there. I always sand the edges of my parts through there first before I put the face frame together. All right, so we'll do one more example. This one's a little bit wider, and this one you can see, this board, allergies are killing me. This board you can see has got a pretty good twist in it. If I push down here, we're like 1/8 up off the joiner bit here. So this board let's take that twist out of it. All right, so here's that board. I ran it through the joiner and then hit the other side with the planer. And now you can see it's perfectly flat. There's no rocking to this thing at all. All right, so hopefully this video is helpful. I also realize not everyone has a 12-inch joiner, and my planer's a 15-inch helical head grizzly planer as well. So I realize not everybody has access to this. There are ways around it. Most hardwood lumber yards have milling capabilities, at least pretty much all the hardwood lumber yards that I've been to offer that. So you can go there, pick out rough lumber, and then have them mill it. And they are basically just putting their stuff through a giant planer and a gang ripsaw and giving you straight edges and milled down to whatever thickness you want. So you're obviously not going to be able to break down your parts into manageable pieces and flatten them on a joiner if you don't have one. So I would recommend picking your lumber and finding stuff that is already, even when it's in the rough, that's already flat, pretty flat and pretty straight. That way when it comes out of the planer, it will be already pretty flat and straight. If you pick a board that is warped and twisted and all that and they run it through their planer, it's going to come out the same way. It'll be smooth, but it's still going to be warped. So just something to think about. There's also ways to, if you needed to flatten a really wide board and your joiner can't handle that, there's ways to make sleds where you basically build a little sled to put your piece on and wedge it where it keeps it from rocking, and it'll go through your planer and you can flatten things that way. You can also make router sleds to router pieces. Now that would be very time consuming if you had a bunch to do, but that would be good for like if you had a wide board or something, you know, that needed to be flattened. But hopefully this was helpful. Again, this is just my process that I take, some tips and things to think about as far as removing material from both sides of the board evenly and ripping boards. If you're, like I said, if you have like a 10-inch wide board and you need to rip a 2-inch piece out of it, chances are when you rip that, it's going to come out. There's going to be some tension in there and it's going to bow a little bit. So making sure you rip a little bit oversized so you can come back to the joiner and straighten that thing out. Another good practice, I guess, would be when you bring in lumber to your shop, usually letting it sit for a few days to kind of acclimate to the environment that it's in. I'll be honest, I don't always do that. Sometimes I get the lumber and I'm like, I need to work with it right away. And I know that the lumber yard I'm getting my lumber from, it's good and dry and all that. But that's a good practice too, to have some kind of moisture meter to check your lumber and make sure it's not high moisture content, make sure it's good and dry. I would not recommend buying poplar and stuff from Home Depot. Anytime I've bought poplar from Home Depot, it has a ton of tension in it. And you rip those boards and they warp and twist and do all kinds of crazy stuff. So my experience with buying like hardwood lumber from there has not been good. Find yourself a local hardwood lumber yard and that will hook you up and you'll be able to get whatever kind of lumber you need. Also, something to think about like this, particularly for me, if I'm making door parts and I get all my parts cut down to rough length and width and I haven't started milling them yet, once I joint one edge, I need to get it through the planer that day because I don't want to take material off of one side and then let it sit overnight, because there is a good chance that it can bow or warp or twist. So if you do joint one side, make sure you hit it through the planer at least with a pass before you let it sit overnight or for however long. Hopefully this video is helpful. Milling boards, it is a very important step in the whole build process, whatever you're building. So, and don't mind me and my allergies, they're killing me this week. But hope you guys had an awesome week. I appreciate y'all. The Patreon is coming. Hopefully next week we'll have it up and running, so be on the lookout for that. More fun build videos coming as well. This week was kind of nuts. I had that closet, if you're following on Instagram, installed that closet this week. Next week we're back on this walnut job. We have a vanity to make and some cool slatted wall paneling. But hope you guys have a great weekend. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you.